From Orlando, Florida and Tulsa, Oklahoma, welcome to the 1330 Podcast with your hosts, Keith Neighbor and Brent Bailey. Pulling from nearly half a century of experience, Brent and Keith share unique wisdom and proven insight to build the leader within you. Interact with us now on Facebook and Twitter at 1330 Podcast or email your questions and comments to 1330podcast@gmail.com. The 1330 Podcast starts right now.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 1330 Podcast. My name is Keith Neighbor. I'm here with my counterpart,
Brent Bailey, and it's a wonderful day in Graham, North Carolina.
Yes, it is. We're happy to be here, coming from the office of the Reverend Joshua Hamilton. Happy to be here. Today, we're going to continue on. We've been talking about some of the behaviors that are holding leaders back, and today we've got a real good one for you, or a few good ones that we're going to hit you with. And the one we're talking about today is complaining, blaming, and excuse making. And we've all experienced those people in our lives. We've been that person in our life that complains about everything, blames everybody else, and makes excuses for everything that goes right or wrong. And we don't want to be that person, and we don't want those people to be around us. And one of the big things that we run into with this, when things go wrong, people tend to do those three things. They complain, they blame, and they make excuses. The people that others want to follow, or the person that somebody wants to follow, is the person that will take responsibility for the mistakes that are made and give other people the credit when successes are present. And I know that, Brent, you've got experience with some of these issues on this, I'm assuming.
Well, I think that as we really tackle this, we need to understand that it's okay to complain in a general sense, because if there is never a complaint, most likely people are lying to you. I mean, you always must have room for improvement, and that means somebody's not going to like something. But what we're talking about is constant nitpicking, complaining, where you're just not going to be happy with what anybody does. And that's the kind of things that we're talking about here. And sure, those kind of people are the people you want to lay hands on suddenly or pray for or whatever. But that never gets anywhere, because if your perfection level is so high nobody's ever going to reach it, then you're setting yourself up to fail, and your people that you're working with you and for you are going to burn out and quit, because you're just unpleasable.
Yes.
So if all you're doing is complaining, you're going to burn them out, and you're just going to have to realize it's never going to be perfect.
Never. Because people are involved.
Yeah. And everybody's thinking differently. So then the other thing is, what you were talking about is the responsibility factor. Now, I'm a lead pastor at a church, founding pastor. The buck stops with me. I mean, no matter what's going on, if a children's department, youth department, or whatever, I still have to, it has to stop with me. And I have to take the responsibility. And that's the thing that I think is really the most constructive, is deciding the difference between blame and responsibility.
Yeah.
And if you're just blaming somebody, I mean, you can blame it on the air. I mean, it was so dry today, I just couldn't do my job. I mean,
right.
I mean, it's not about finding fault. And if you're just constantly finding fault against you, you're just going to be burning somebody out.
I've had people that have volunteered with me before that when things have gone wrong, and it wasn't a time where we were coming in to reprimand anybody. It was just one of those times where it was like, hey, this didn't work. And before anything was even said, somebody basically said, that wasn't my fault. And I was like, well, nobody said that it was your fault. And immediately when people do that, it starts to tell me what kind of a person they are.
Yeah.
And I don't,
real fast.
It's at that point that you just don't want to give anybody that's in a position like that, or has an attitude like that, the responsibility to be over anything, because everything that they're over, anytime it goes wrong, it'll never be their fault. And again, we just don't have time with what we're doing. We don't have time for somebody that's just always, pointing the finger in another direction, saying, well, if Brent had shown up on time, or if Keith had done this, or if, what could you have done to make this work? A lot of times if When I'm over things, if something's not working, as Brent said, the buck stops with him. At my job, the buck stops with me as well. If something's not working on the job site, it comes back to me. Whether I know what's happening or not, I get blamed for everything. And it's my job to get it straightened out and make it work right. Thankfully, I don't have a lot of guys that work for me that are running around pointing their finger. They'll take responsibility for what was done and we'll get it taken care of. But that's the thing that will move things forward is, get rid of the complaining, get rid of the blaming, and get rid of the excuses. Well, if we had a better sound system and the worship leader was better, then we'd have more people coming to our church. You know what? Keep loving people and keep loving God, and your church is going to grow.
Yeah, don't worry about if it doesn't work. Make it as good as you can for right now, all right?
Yep.
Let's move on to the next one, and that is withholding feedback. And really, these next two tie together.
Yeah.
Is withholding feedback, but then not asking for feedback. When somebody asks you what do you think about this or how do you think that went, then you need to go ahead and say it.
Yeah.
If it didn't work,
yep,
there's nothing wrong with saying this was a disaster. I mean,
because everybody already knows it was a disaster.
Right. I mean, if there's there's nothing more sad than a clueless leader that walks around and just goes, "Isn't everything so wonderful?" And people behind their back are going, "Oh my gosh, this is a train wreck."
Yeah. Yep.
And
we've all been around those people that, or know of people that are like
we've
that.
been those people.
Yeah.
I mean, just
true.
Until somebody told you something, and then you're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't see that," or "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" or whatever. And that's the thing. If you really love the person that you're working for or with, care about them I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about you really care about them. If you really care about the organization that you're working for and you hold back, you're not doing them any favors.
None.
You're not at all.
Well, and the flip side of that, as a leader, when somebody underneath you has taken on responsibility and they're doing something, if you never tell them one way or the other, this is good or bad, or we could improve in this area or tweak this area to make it a little bit better, and you're withholding all of your thought on that, eventually something is going to happen and you're going to unload on them about it. And their response is going to be one of shock because you've never said anything about anything to them in this arena before. And
now suddenly it's all been
now
wrong.
Everything's wrong.
And it may be years worth of
absolutely
cluelessness.
Yep.
And that may be hard for them to ever move on and get past that.
I ask for feedback because I've worked I haven't worked a ton of places in my life, but every place that I've ever worked has never been great at feedback. And so I look for it. And I will ask people, hey, what did you think about this? Or what did you think about that? And that goes to asking for it because it takes a strong leader to be able to ask, hey, will you nitpick this apart for me?
Most leaders never ask for that. They ask for compliments. They fish for compliments.
Oh, yeah.
But they never ask for honest feedback. But the good ones do.
Yep. Well, after you get done preaching, Brent, how many times have you gone up and you'll ask somebody, man, did that go all right? And they're like, oh man, that was awesome. That was like one of the best messages you've ever preached. Then you go and you ask your wife, and your wife looks at you and says, well, which answers everything that you needed to know there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that probably brings us to a really important thing here. You need to have somebody that you trust that gives you, because there's going to be some people, they're always going to give you negative feedback.
Well, if you go to one of the complainers, excuse makers, or blamers,
it's always going to be terrible.
It's always going to be terrible. Your response for the feedback they're going to give you is always going to be through that filter. But I know when Brent and I were working together, I could go to Brent and say, hey, what did and ask him questions about something that I'd done that he was there for. And I was going to get an honest answer. I may not like the answer, but it was never an answer that was done from a position of, I'm going to try and hurt him by saying this. I'm going to
buckle up. You're getting punched in the gut.
Well, and it may have been a punch to the gut, but it was never done intentionally.
Yeah.
It was always, every response from him was always one where it was like,
well, it's kind of like pulling out a splinter.
Yeah.
It hurts.
Yep.
But it's better when it's out.
Absolutely.
And it's the same way here. I mean, Keith calls me still to this day. If I preach something and he really enjoyed it, he'll tell me. Or if he thinks that something was weird or fishy, or not, just not good, And that's the thing. You need to have somebody in your life that you trust enough to give you honest feedback. And then, this says a lot about your family. Your family will give you feedback regardless. If it's terrible, your family will let you know.
Yes,
and a lot of times we kind of go, oh, whatever. The thing is if you have nobody that you really trust and your family's giving you feedback, use it. I mean, you need to have a real window of trust that people can say these things into your life and know that they're not trying to destroy you. And then you're just going to have to get over yourself and spit out the hay and spit out the sticks and chew up the hay.
And on the other side of this, the only way that you are ever going to improve in an area is to get feedback, honest feedback from somebody. If you played sports when you were growing up, you had coaches that would pull you aside that worked on your technique and your form. And they didn't do that because they were trying to be mean to you. They were doing it to try and make you a better player. The great players are the ones that have somebody critique things that they're doing constantly. The great players are always tweaking their game.
Yeah, watching the game films.
Yep. They say that Peyton Manning, that guy, if you ever want to find him, just go to the film room because that's where he's at.
Yeah.
Regardless. And they said if there was anybody, that guy watched more film and more tape than the coaches did, which is what made him such a great quarterback because he knew everything that was going to be thrown at him. As a pastor, as a leader, if we want to make improvements like that, and if we want to ever get to the top of our game, then we're going to have to constantly be critiquing our game and our leadership skills, abilities, the events, the services, whatever it is that we're doing. We've got to constantly be looking at these things and making the effort to make them better.
And one other way we could do this, I got to touch on it real quick, is look for the non-verbal or obvious feedback. Because sometimes there's feedback being given, and sometimes we're just too blind to see it. Because people aren't going to say anything. Well, nobody said anything. Nobody's complained. Nobody's really said, yeah, but are you entrenched enough in your organization, your church, or whatever, to see it? If you see people, when you're around, get quiet and stop talking, that's feedback. If people don't want to hire you, that's feedback. If people, don't come to church, and I'm not talking about skipping to go to the beach. I'm talking about they just,
no one's coming.
Nobody's coming. That's feedback. And those are things that you have to constantly be looking at as well. The nonverbal feedback speaks actually more often and louder than the verbal feedback does. The verbal feedback just focuses what the nonverbal doesn't do. So with that being said, we're going to wrap up this 1330 podcast. We're going to come back with one more on these 12 habits of leaders that are holding them back. And then we'll move on to something else. We got a couple of guests that we're going to have with us, and it's going to be really good. I think that, as Keith and I, we're down here for a wedding in North Carolina, and we've been able to spend some time with some great friends, and they've done a lot with us, for us, been there for us, and we want to just let y'all experience them. So that'll be coming up here in the next couple of podcasts as well. Until next time, reach out to us on Facebook and Twitter at 1330 Podcast, or give us a shout on email, 1330podcast@gmail.com. And let us know what your questions, your comments, your complaints, your blames, and everything else are.
Feedback, baby. Come on. Let's have it.
Let us know what's happening. Until next time, I'm Brent Bailey.
I'm Keith Neighbor. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us for the 1330 Podcast with Brent and Keith. We want to hear from you. Find us on Facebook and Twitter today at 1330 Podcast, or email us directly at 1330podcast@gmail.com. Join us next time for another 13 minutes and 30 seconds geared to change you into the leader that you and those who follow you want you to be.